warned. This book actually serves as a warning to anyone thinking about going through a court system, whether it be family court, probate, even criminal court. You can't go into this eyes wide shut. You have to have your eyes open, at least be prepared.
Today on Triumph Talks, I'm bringing back an author who is proving what a difference one woman can make. Maryann Petri was a registered nurse for 23 years and in a decent co-parent relationship with 3 children. She soon found herself fending off 2 back-to-back false indications of emotional child abuse that cost her not only her career as an RN, but her children as well. Losing her children to a highly corrupt family court system led to parental alienation of all 3 kids. After the fleecing by the courts, Maryann went pro se, representing herself, and appealed to the Superior Court of Pennsylvania, and finally won a life-saving child support case. Raised by These Wolves, How Family and Federal Courts Are Failing Our Children tells the true stories of victims who have appeared on Maryann Petri's podcast, Slam the Gavel. Through these heart-wrenching and all too common experiences, Maryann displays how there is no justice in the courtroom and that we must take our cases to the court of public opinion. Maryann drills down to the truth of the matter, that through taxpayer dollars, we are giving courts power and access to intentionally remove our children at their whim without any evidence or just cause. Maryann rightfully characterizes this corruption as legal human trafficking, which leaves children essentially being raised by wolves. Maryann, thank you
Hey,
so much for coming back to Triumph Talks.
thank you for having me back on. We have a lot
Of
to go
course.
over.
Yes, there is. And you have become a very good friend of mine. I've been able to work with you now on, this is your 3rd book.
Right.
And so you were on the show previously for a book called Dismantling Family Court Corruption, Why Taking the Kids Was Not Enough. You also have a book of poems that's
Yes.
very similar in style, that's all about going through this process of being abused by the courts with your eyes full of tears. So now here we are talking about Raised by These Wolves, and where the first book was your story and your takeaways, which I encourage anybody who's interested. I will put the link at the end of this show so that you can watch that previous interview where you talk about your story and all that you've learned, all that you've been through. And now you're using your podcast, Slam the Gavel, to give voice to so many who are suffering the same situation.
Most definitely. Their stories have to be told.
Yes, and this is why I said in the beginning, you are proving what a difference just one woman can make, because you are really making headway. How long has your podcast been on?
It's been on since September of 2020.
So as of right now, that's coming up on 4 years, which is a long time. You've had how many downloads?
I don't know. I mean,
You're losing track.
there's so many. I really haven't went back and looked, to be honest.
Yeah, I know that you're in the tens of thousands, if not
Yeah.
more. Yeah, you really have. It's a very active podcast. I know I've listened to it. You have amazing guests across the board. Even people who are from the court system are coming on and sharing what they see and what they know. So it's really making a difference.
Right.
So this book is a collection of stories from people that you've interviewed on your podcast, and some of them I know are from people that you helped because you would take a lot of crisis calls. So let me begin with my first question that I have for all the authors who come on this channel, and that is, what inspired you to write this book?
Well, what inspired me was not only my story and what I went through, but talking to all these other parents, what they were going through, and their stories needed to be told because they were not getting justice in a courtroom.
Yeah. I'll say that your book is very, I don't know if hard to read is the right word. It's painful to read these stories, but you've also collected them in a way that they're very short reads, which
Mhm,
I think is good, and I think that those who are looking at this and saying, "Wow, I don't know if I'd wanna read a book about this," they may be people who are going through this. I imagine a lot of people who are going through this might be looking at your book and wondering if they've already got so much trauma, if they can handle reading about the trauma of others.
mhm,
But, my response to that is that they're not long.
mhm,
It's just enough information to really understand their story, to feel for them, to see the injustice, and to make an impact. In a lot of cases, they actually
mhm,
teach things that they wish they had done differently. So I think it's a really important book for anybody who is going through this, to learn from these stories.
mhm.
And I know that you told me a lot of these people bought multiple copies of the book and shared it with people in positions of authority. Do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Right, when this book came out and it was published by you, a lot
Yes.
of the parents bought the book, and they also sent it to their judges and legislators, which is very important because this book serves as a witness to
Mhm.
what parents and their children are going through. This book actually serves as a warning to anyone thinking about going through a court system, whether it be family court, probate, even criminal court. You can't go into this eyes wide shut. You have to have your eyes open, at least be prepared. This book will help prepare anyone through these processes that are not just.
That is critical. That is just absolutely critical right there. I agree. I think without putting collection of these experiences into a book and into your podcast, people not might not realize just how widespread the problem is and how systemic. Um,
It
I know
it
that there's so many legislation that has been put into place that actually turns the courts into moneymakers. And so they're operating like a business. You want to talk about that a little bit?
the story that tells it really well as far as it, running like a business is the Jim Schock case. He's been in Westchester County with, Judge Maryann Petri neighbor, and essentially, this is a money court. His child is living with a four-count felon, but the judge won't give him full custody. I know people want 50-50 shared custody, and that's fine if you've got 2, uh, decent individuals, but if you have one that's a personality disorder, 50-50 is not cookie cutter. It's you can't have it both ways when you're dealing with a personality disorder, and this poor man spent so much money going through courts when he should have had his son a long time ago. We're talking years ago.
Yeah, and I know you have other stories where not only are they not getting or 50-50, but they're getting no contact with their children, and yet they're having to pay the child support, and they're supposed to be having contact. So it's the spouse or the ex-spouse is denying what the court has ordered, and yet the court does not enforce that person's ability to have any contact with their children, which is a clear sign of personality disorder.
Right, and there's a lot of
Mm.
personality disorders playing in the Heidi and Matt Weber case, and, she was a national whistleblower herself, and what had
Wow.
happened was CPS entered their home and basically abducted their youngest child, who was going to be 18, and they, you know, fought back, but they never got their kid back. They never got to see her graduate from college.
Mm,
And then on top of that, they had legal fees. They took it to
mhm,
federal court and kept the case alive for practically close to a year. And they thought they were going to trial. Here they are in federal court with all this evidence and going through the hell of discovery and
mhm.
depositions. Then the judge drops the case
Just
out of the
just
blue.
on a whim. Yeah. I know I've seen that a lot in your stories, where they just basically, there's no rules for them.
No.
There are, but they don't enforce them. There doesn't seem to be any process for enforcing the rules upon those who run the courts. And that's really a lot of the problem, I think. But ultimately, it is a matter of raising awareness before we can
Mhm.
fix any of it. And I believe that, especially with CPS and the funding that goes into moving kids away from their homes and other places, the amount of money that foster parents get versus
Right.
how much money is spent, it's practically money laundering, really, just
Uh,
taking the money and keeping it.
yes.
Yeah.
Exactly, exactly. When you have foster parents calling their foster kids their Denali payments, I have a
Oh,
problem with that.
wow. You've seen that, huh?
That was, talked about on one of my podcasts.
Mm, wow. That is incredible.
Yeah,
So I'm glad that you shared some of the stories. I was going to ask you about that, if there is any stories in your book in particular that you'd like to highlight. So let me move to the next question, and that is, what do you hope people will take from reading your book? And I know we kind of touched on this a little bit already, but if you'd like to expound a little bit more on what people should be able to do after reading your book.
they should understand that this can happen to anyone. This can happen to them.
Mm.
Your life could be going smoothly, and then all of a sudden, you've got a legal problem, or someone has caused you a legal problem. People need to be already prepared for what can happen and what steps to take and what steps not to take.
Oh, interesting. Interesting.
Yeah.
So what can you just, for those that are watching this that may be dealing with this in their life, or it's impending, they're waiting on a court case. What are some things that you can tell them right now that they should do or not do?
If at all possible, if you're not dealing with an ex who's a personality disorder, don't go in the courtroom. Just because you're getting divorced doesn't mean you have to run into a courtroom. If you can work it out amicably with your ex, great. But if you cannot do that and you get hauled into court like I did, get an attorney that works outside of your city who does not play in the same sandbox as the players you're going to go into that courtroom with.
Yeah. Because it's a business. They're working together. I've seen a lot of quid pro quos happen
Yes,
where
yes,
a lot of the deals are made at the water cooler, so to speak.
definitely.
How hard is it to get a lawyer who's not in your courts, so to speak? Is that difficult?
Well, I went on to like I had a referral to go to one, and thank goodness she was awesome
Mm,
and life-saving.
yeah,
But parents can just go and Google attorneys outside of their city and start looking at their reviews and see how they rate.
yeah. I know that a lot of the stories also are people whose own lawyers did not do their job
Right.
and really hurt them badly. In fact, that's very common, which is why I know you give that advice. It really is important advice. That first advice being, don't go to court. This idea that I love that picture that you have behind you that you painted and that comes from your first book,
Yeah.
um, of Lady Justice that's got, there isn't justice. It's not blind justice anymore. And
Mm-mm.
I think more and more we're starting to see that as a society that we really have a problem with that, that branch of the government.
Right. It
But it's
seems
getting people to say, "Oh, that can affect me." And we
Mhm.
should all do our very best to stay out of the courts because they're just like we said at the beginning, they're all there to fleece you. They really are. I mean, there's a few good stories I'm sure that worked out, but there's so many that aren't good that it really is an epidemic, I would say.
Right. There is an abuse of judicial
Mm,
discretion, and there is no oversight. So what they're doing is policing each other,
mm,
and the attorneys are policing each other. So what chance does any parent have going into this courtroom?
yeah,
And it's
it's
really not, if you think about it, it's not even an actual courtroom.
mhm,
It's not handled appropriately. There is no jury.
yeah. Wow, it's crazy. I mean, It will make you feel insane.
Yes.
And I'll admit, reading some of these stories, you're just, oh, it is hard to read them, but it's important. I think that that's an important thing to say right now, is that it is important. This book is for everyone, because everyone needs to understand what's going on, because it might not be you today, and it may never be you, but it might be your neighbor. It could be your sister, your brother, your child that goes through this. And and the only way the change is going to happen is, like you said, is taking it to the court of public opinion, which is what
Mhm.
you're really doing here. So the next question that I have for you, and I think this is a really good question, is how did you come up with the title and cover of your book? Because it's very unique, your title, I'd say.
Yes. I've always heard the term growing up, "raised by wolves," or "a wolf in sheep's clothing," and that always fascinated me.
Well, I think the key too is it's that adage that they're a wolf in sheep's clothing. And I
That's
think that's
exactly.
really what you're playing with here,
Yeah,
is the
and
idea that you think that these people are there to deliver justice and to help you because you're being abused by your ex. And
right,
in reality, they're just part of the
and
wolves that are there to tear you up and tear up your family.
it's symbolic of CPS removing your kids, throwing
Mhm.
them into a foster home, and they're being raised by wolves there, and or the judge taking an abused child, giving it back to the abuser to be raised by wolves.
Yeah. So the raised by wolves is really, the raising is, I think, multifaceted, like you just said,
Yes,
where
yes,
the child could be put in foster care, it's being raised by CPS, the courts are taking charge, or just the parent that has the most money is the one that may get the kids, and that's the one who's,
mhm,
I know in your stories there's people who they're, pedophiles. I mean,
right,
it's known. They're convicted pedophiles that are getting the children, where a mother or a father that has no record and are the ones that are just fighting to do good for the children are constantly denied, denied, denied.
mhm.
And like I said, it's just enough to make your mind just not even be able to function. But
You're right,
we
and
have to face it, and we have to face the fact we've got wolves running, these institutions. So,
right, and they know what they're doing. They know
that's a
exactly
good point.
they know who their prey is,
Mm,
and what is also important about this book is how these relationships were formed with, individuals and how they did end up in family court.
mhm.
That
I
leads
think
up
it's im
to that
I
as
think
well.
it's important to point out that, over the years, because there's so much money involved and just the way the process is, it's almost become standard operation, where I think a lot of lawyers step into family law and they don't realize
Mm-mm.
fully just how dysfunctional and corrupt their business is. And it takes these stories, which is why we want to give these books to those people to say, hey, look what's going on. Can you be part of the change? Because I believe there's definitely some good people that go into that profession,
Mhm.
but yet they get caught up in the quid pro quo, and this is how it functions, and this is just how it's done. And that's the sad part. And more I think it's just, this is how it's done. And
Right.
so, and yeah, so it's really a problem. Well, this is your 3rd book, as I mentioned, and you have just released your 4th book as of, gosh, I
July
think we're just
19th.
on a week ago, yeah,
Right.
that your 2nd book, and it's actually become a series. So this is, Raised by These Wolves Volume 2, and it is a number 1. It was a hot new release. I've got the picture here showing Amazon notating a hot new release. Number 1 hot new release. And, what's the tagline? Can you share that with us?
Child trafficking within the foster care and court systems.
So you're really, putting that emphasis and that exclamation mark on the child trafficking aspect of what's
Mhm.
happening in this book. And of course, you talk about that in the first one, so it's not a new take on it, it's just saying, "Hey, you know what, let's
Yeah,
call it what it is," right?
right, right, and so many kids are being trafficked through these court systems, and parents, when they get divorced and go through custody, they don't realize they themselves are being trafficked as well.
Wow, it's true. It's true because and this is something that I think we're starting to see a lot more awareness around, just the concept of human trafficking of late, which is a booming business for the cartels,
Mhm.
because where you can sell drugs once, you can make money on human beings over and over and over. But what people don't realize is that labor and sex traffickings are not the only ways that human beings become products on which money is made. And I think that if we were to, it'd be interesting to see somebody do a study to just look at how much money is made taking children away from their homes, putting them in foster care, because what's that, Title IV?
Title IV defunding, there's Title IV
Mhm,
B, D, and E.
mhm, and those, are essentially put in place to generate money for these activities. I
Right,
mean,
right.
that's essentially what they do. I mean, they're put
It's
in place under, more noble auspices, but the reality is that they have allowed and funded this activity, really.
right, and our Social
Mhm.
Security monies are also being used to do this.
So we're all forcibly taking part in human trafficking.
Mhm.
And of course, we all know that there's a lot of sex abuse that does happen in these foster homes. That's in your stories as well, just because
Right,
it's a part of
right.
what happened. You've got stories in this second book of people who have been in the foster care as children, and they talk about the things that happened to them. And so it's, yeah, that book is, well, I'll have you come back and we'll take a deeper dive into your fourth book or your second book in the Raised by These Wolves series. Um, so then let's pivot to my last question, and that is, I think, really important because there's so many people watching this who may have an important story along these lines to share. That maybe they eventually could reach out to you if you continue to do volume 3. But what advice do you have for aspiring authors? Because you are making a very big difference with the books that you're writing. They're having an impact. And so as someone who's such a success at making a difference in the world with your books, what advice do you have for aspiring authors? But in particular, how would they follow in your footsteps and make a difference in the world with their stories?
When parents call me and they say they wanna write their own story and write a book, I tell them, "Start in chronological order and tell your story as it happened." Writing nonfiction as opposed to fiction is like comparing apples to oranges. And I think when you tell your story, it's gotta be in chronological order so people will understand what happened next, and they can get the takeaways from it, like we did in the first book of what could have been done better or not done at all. And so that's how I advise them.
That's really good advice, and, I'm glad that you said that because I know a lot of times when I've had conversations with authors and, who are telling stories, sometimes they talk about start in the middle, create this strong sort of hook,
Mhm,
and then show how you got there. But in your type of storytelling where you're taking on something like the law, it really is important to be as clear as possible as to what happened, what led to the next, and establish
mhm,
really what you're doing is you are creating a case for people
mhm.
through their storytelling in your book. That does become, I would say, you have a collection of evidence.
Right.
Um, so I will point out then that I do believe that you are being very courageous in, you are taking on probably one of the most powerful systems in the world, as you're pointing out what they are doing to people.
Mhm.
And that no doubt can be, whenever you take on something powerful, it can come with some inherent danger. and I applaud you for your bravery. You are a strong woman, not
Thank you.
someone to be walked on.
No.
And you stand for the victims and you give them the opportunity to feel a sense of triumph. And I just am so in awe of you and what you're doing. I know that your book, your first book, has been made into a short film. You want to talk about that just a little bit?
Right, we filmed a short, which is longer than a trailer, and this way we can compete with it and then also put it to investors and get a major motion picture made. The director is Adam Worth. He's a five-time Emmy award-winning director.
Yeah. So I do hope that the trailer or the short gets a lot of attention. And what you are doing, you are the Aaron Brockovich of family court corruption.
No.
Pick on the water issues. You're taking on the court issues, and really and truly the amount of people who are affected by this corruption is even larger. And so it's so important for that for your story to be continue to be told. It's
Mhm.
definitely told in your first book, as we mentioned, and you continue to fight for good through your podcast. And Marianne, I consider you a very dear friend as well. So
Oh, I
it's
consider you a very, very close friend too.
yes. Oh, so what do you have on the horizon? Anything that you can share in addition to what we've talked?
Well, other than pushing this, short film and getting it to where it needs to go and getting actors in place, that's my focus right now, and my
Yeah.
podcast.
So, where do people find your podcast? How can they tune in and listen to you?
Well, it's everywhere. It's on all platforms, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Apple iTunes, Google. It's everywhere.
Good. How frequently are your shows?
Oh, sure. I run my podcast, Slam the Gavel. It's probably on every other day or twice a week.
Twice a week. Yeah, I know you do it quite frequently, which is amazing. Well, thank you again for coming back on, and I look forward to continuing these conversations as you continue to fight and make a real difference.
Oh, thank you. We'll keep going.
Yes, we will.